Here on the Colour of Country Life Flow FM, we're speaking with Brett Hosking, Chair of Grain Growers. How are you going, Brett?
Yeah, going well, thanks, Rick.
And you're also a farmer at Quambatook, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
And how's the season looking there at Quamby for your farm and others in the district?
Well, I feel like I say this every year, but it's really hanging on what the spring does. Crops were really dry autumn, slow start, but a really wet winter. So they've sort of done the catch-up bit through winter. But right now we're just starting to feel a bit of moisture stress and really looking for a front to come through in the next day or so, which will make a huge difference if we can score that one.
Yeah, well, we've been chasing the issue of it's all well and good for the crops to come through, but we need the labour to make sure that it can get through and processed and off to markets. And there's some comments attributed to you late yesterday about this topic. Where's Grain Growers at about the labour needs for the harvest?
Yeah, look, it is over 80% of our growers are saying this is one of the biggest concerns they have for the next 12 months is sourcing labour, particularly at peak season, so harvest and sowing and that sort of thing. And then we're throwing in COVID overlay over the top where we've got, how do we get workers into the country, skilled workers? Do they have to quarantine, not quarantine? And then we're throwing in another layer with the various states saying, well, you can't cross our line on the map and you can't go back if you do cross that line. And we're just saying, you know what, guys, we know you all care about keeping people safe, but no one cares more about our little rural communities than those of us that live and work in them. And we will do what we have to do to make sure our community stays safe from the virus, but we do still need the workers and we need a really functional way to get them here on farm.
Yeah, well, when you look at the restrictions with lockdown also across a number of Victoria and New South Wales regions as well, and the low unemployment rate, so you've actually got a lot of people engaged in employment otherwise, we're going to probably need to lean on workers we can bring in pretty heavily, and then quarantining them is going to be a challenge as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the Australian grain industry has always relied on that skill sharing between the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. So a lot of, effectively professional header drivers, coming from Europe and America and even the Ukraine and places like that. And they'll do the Northern Hemisphere harvest. They'll come down here and they'll enjoy a Southern Hemisphere harvest. And they'll bring their skills in both directions. What they learn driving headers in the Northern Hemisphere, they bring to the Southern Hemisphere. And then they take their skills from here back again. And you're actually putting someone on a machine that, has experienced, knows the machine and can actually be 100% productive from day one. And that's really, really valuable when, I guess the crops ripe and in the paddock and we know weather can be looming and we need that instant ability to get in there and take the crop off.
Now, we've spotted at the Flow News 24 desk across the last week or so, since the Agriculture Minister announced this Ag Visa, a lot of politics being played by state Ag Ministers and even the Federal Minister. He's saying, well, I've created all the visas you need to get the workers in. States get on with it, but you've got two states locked down. What are you picking up in terms of signals, or what's your organisation's indication to these state ministers what they need to do?
I think every grower out there is just getting frustrated with the backwards and forwards and the lack of consistency and the lack of a plan and a direction coming out of whether it be federal, state, whoever. And I think that's what growers are looking for. What they're looking for is, okay, can you just set the rules and keep the rules the same and we'll find a way to work with them. But unfortunately, we've got, one state minister, one state premier will make a decision and they'll change it a week later, or another one will make a different decision. And we're lacking that consistency and we're lacking that clarity. And we're also kind of, lacking that ability to plan our own businesses and our own harvest plans to be able to work within the system that they've created.
What's the critical timeline here for the grain industry? It's a bit like how long's a piece of string in a sense, but when would you be needing those drivers, for instance, for the harvest machinery?
Yeah, so talking to some of the guys up in Queensland, around the Darling Downs, they're expecting to have headers operating in the last week of September. So that's literally only 3 or 4 weeks away now. We've ended September. So for those guys, the opportunity to bring overseas worker, that window's closed. By the time they source them, bring them in and do their 2 weeks quarantine, effectively the harvest is in full swing. So I guess we're really starting to look now at a way to look after the guys who are further south. And this is a challenge as time goes on. the time pressure becomes much greater. And the reality is if we can't get the workers on farm, what we're going to see is, when that weather front's coming and the crop's ripe and ready in the paddock, that no grower will go home and say, I need to get a rest and go to bed. They're just going to push themselves that little bit harder. And we really don't want that happening. We want growers to be able to enjoy a harvest and take the crop off, but take care of themselves and their families as well. And so if we can make sure we've got the workers, we keep everyone a whole heap safer.
Well, that's really important, and keep us posted from the grain growers front where you get to with the state ministers. We've got the New South Wales minister now at least saying he wants to form an East Coast agriculture task force. It's a step in the right direction. Maybe they'll need to lean into Tasmania to bring workers through there with lockdowns in the two major states.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think New South Wales and Victoria have both got challenges with COVID. There's no doubt about that, but I feel like in our rural communities and on our farms, our grain farms in particular, which are in some of the most remote parts of the states, I feel like we can find a way to work with it if we're given the opportunity.
Brett Hosking, Chair of Grain Growers, thanks for joining us today from Quambatook.
No, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having us.